Hello, how's it going? Skip the tea today, and I'm gonna have a ginger ale. It's Friday, right? Go crazy. Um, I have to pour it. Sorry. Fast forward, fast forward. Um, Canada Dry. Send me some money, buddy. Um, so I wanted to talk about government. I'm not going to get into modern politics today, but you can probably draw a few uh, inferences, conclusions, etc. Um, and a lot of the sources for this come from let's just give you okay. So Plato's Republic, uh, Plato's Statesman, Aristotle's Politics, and Machiavelli's Prince. You could also put his discourses on Livy in there because he actually gives a lot of examples of how this stuff played out in the Roman times. So essentially, you can have governments of three different kinds. You can have one person ruling everything, you can have a few people ruling everything, or you can have a whole lot of people ruling things. So when it's one person, usually it's called a monarchy. And the monarchy is usually when one man or one woman controls everything. So in a good way, this is called a monarch because the people accept the rule. So in this case, man or woman, usually a man, controls everything. He can do things very quickly. Policies can change very quickly, and they can get enforced quickly. You know, in order for like I said, in order for this to be good, considered good, is that the people have to accept it. They want this because they want the speed of it. They want the uh, lack of hesitation in it. Meaning, you know, they basically consent to what he does and what he decides to do. Now, this can go wrong. And a bad version of a monarchy, we'll call it a tyranny. This is where, yeah, one man controls everything. He can do very bad things very quickly. Policies can get changed and enforced quickly, so things can go from good to bad like that. And the tyrant does. The difference is the tyrant does whatever he wants to do, despite consent or no consent. People are largely irrelevant in anything he has to do. Um, in the case of few people running the country, when it's good, it's called aristocracy. And this is where the best people control things. So aristos is the Greek word for the best. That kind of peak in the back of your throat. It kind of like a little needles in the back of your throat. It's good though. The best people control things, and they tend to be wealthy, well educated, well intentioned. You think of like the aristocracy of like Britain, you know, these noble lords who there's an expression, the French expression, but it's used a lot in sort of medieval and late medieval politics called noblesse oblige, which means the nobility um, obliges you to take care of the poor people or to the less powerful, the less capable people. Um, so they might confer with one another to enact policies, to elect a king, elect some sort of overlord of all of the little areas that they control. They might not agree with one another sometimes, and so that's when things don't go so well in these aristocracies. They might have little petty squabbles, and that might get in the way of actual policy. Now, when a few people run something like an area or country or even just a sub kingdom like a duchy or something, they will call it an oligarchy. And this comes from the word oligos, which means few. So this means that instead of one tyrant, you get a few tyrants. So that doesn't mean that it's any worse. It's actually not quite as bad as a tyrant because, you know, while they might be able to collude with one another against the people. Sometimes they end up plotting against one another. They instead of going after the people, they just go after one another. They might be trying to, instead of 10 people running the show, they might want to get rid of 5 of them, and then that's more power for them. And then finally, you have the rule of many people, or most people, or all people. We would call this, in its good form, democracy. It comes from demos, which is sort of a, if you looked at the map of Athens, you'd see it kind of divided up into little zones, and those are called demos. And they kind of have a feel to them. They're sort of almost like a little bit bigger than a neighborhood, where if you walk, like I live in a large city, Philadelphia. If you walk in my neighborhood near the football and basketball stadiums, you kind of get a feel for the area. If you say you go north about a mile, and then east about a mile, you're going to get a different vibe to it. You're going to get the old city where Philadelphia was founded. A lot of these cities date from the early 1800s or early 1700s. You're just going to see a totally different type of architecture. The streets are going to be different. This is the same was true in Athens. Is that things were, these neighborhoods, these demos were different, and the people were different. They might have come from different backgrounds. Obviously, people in the same neighborhood tend to give a similar variety. Either ethnic variety, the same social class, the same jobs, the same education. So anyway, the point is that the people in these areas would get together and add up all their little votes. They would vote on somebody either to represent them, to do sort of like the work that they wanted done, or they would vote on a policy. And whoever ended up getting the most votes, or the majority of the votes, that's who won the day. So sometimes you can say that a majority would win. Sometimes just having more votes than the next guy would get you the win. And so in these cases, that the extremes tend to get drowned out. So people who have very wild, kooky, almost incomprehensible ideas would, they kind of get pushed to the sides. So in a case of a monarchy, sometimes the wild and kooky person ends up being the king. And that's a bad thing, right? So in a democracy, you kind of use, in statistics, you have what's called a normal distribution. It's a classic bell-shaped curve. And so the people on the extremes of this curve are basically drowned out. You can just kind of ignore them. And the people in the middle here, they're the ones who matter the most. Usually that happens. Sometimes you don't get it, like in the case of Nazi Germany. Just allowing these people to get any representation ended up costing the German Weimar Republic. They just completely collapse. So you have to design it so these people don't get more power than they're due. I suppose in a country where everybody's a Nazi, like legitimately a racist, kind of, we would call crazy lunatic, I suppose they would get representation, like full representation. If your system is not designed to flush out the minority opinion, like extreme minority opinion, then you could see this thing start taking over. But that's more about design of government. So in the case of democracy, you can there's a concept in political science, and they use it in economics, in a field of economics called public choice, where there's this idea of the median voter theory, where essentially, if you can look at, typically in American politics, this is true in other politics in Britain and in Europe, politics tends to be a one-dimensional thing where it's like just a line. So you have from the left to the right. This is going to be, it might be opposite on the screen, but just imagine that it's a one-dimensional line. So that's why, like, even, we use the term one-dimensional as sort of an insult, somebody who is not very complicated. Politics is, it might be stupid, it might be silly, but it is complicated. It is more than one dimension. So every policy you have is its own dimension, and there might be more than one dimension within a policy. So anyway, the point is that if you just simplify to one dimension, that you would have, if you have a distribution of voters over the left and the right, you will see they will basically kind of go towards the median. The median is not necessarily the average. The median is if you give people over here 0 and you give these people 10, and then you just line up people according to how they fall in there. It could be skewed this way, it could be skewed this way. But the middle person, so if there's 101 people, you're looking for that 51st person, 50th, 99 people. Let's do it simple. If you have 99 voters, that 50th person, you are going to want, that person's going to get his way. The one in the middle. It's not because he's special, it's just because he happens to be the middleest person in the room or in the country. I think there was a movie, I've never seen it, but I think it was Kevin Costner called The Median Voter, or the swing vote, that's what it was. And essentially these people end up deciding who is president, whose policies get enacted. And a lot of people on the extremes, or at least in the, maybe not the extremes, but really solidly on one side or the other, hate the people in the middle because they're either seen as fickle or just not very interested in politics, sort of complacent. And they think, well, why is this person getting to ruin my plans? The thing is with the democracy in the good way, these people, the median voter, can actually be taught a subject. Like if you want to talk about policies, you can talk about economics with the median voter, or you could talk about international politics, why one party might be a little bit better if you want to have a more interventionist style of international politics, or if you want to be a little bit more isolationist. You can try to convince this person in the middle that your way is the correct way. You can teach them, you can persuade them. Now, on the other hand, for all these people who get a vote, this can be bad. It's often called mob rule, which is a really underrated album by Black Sabbath, but we'll leave it at that. So this can be bad. Actually, the term, this is the one term I don't really often hear the Greek form. It's called an ochlocracy. Maybe it's because it's hard to pronounce, but mob rule just sounds a little bit more sinister. In the case of mob rule, people go nuts. I mean, they don't really listen to reason. They kind of behave like they're in some sort of swarm or a hive, and they get to vote. It might not be very orderly, but they, if a lot of people are pissed off about something, they're going to be out in the streets breaking things, as we've seen in the past. And in this case, the majority gets to tyrannize the minority. Or, if you want to do it with force, the people who have the most amount of force or the most desire to use force will tyrannize the rest of the people. And even if you want to stick purely to voting, let's say that, for example, you have 99 people in a country, right? And 50% of them, they might belong to a certain religion, or they might belong to a certain ethnic group, or just a political position. They might vote to just kill the 49 people. And that's a form of mob rule. That's what is wrong with what can really go wrong with democracy is that somebody, and this person's usually called a demagogue, can whip the majority up into a frenzy and persuade them to go do terrible things to people who stand in their way. And so if you look at all these three different types of governments, you have the one man rules, a few men rule, or everyone rules. All of them have potential for good. So the monarchy can get things done quickly. Policy is advised and put into action very quickly. I mean, you could just have the king sitting there and he suddenly decides that he wants to do something and it starts happening like that. Aristocracy, it's a little bit slower. Things can get done quickly if they all tend to be on the same page. Typically, people who are educated tend to learn the same thing, so they might be a little bit more on the same page as one another. They're all sitting in the same position because most of them are rich. They might be noble-minded. Let's hope. So these people, the policy can get done somewhat quickly. The policy is made by educated and intelligent people who happen to have skin in the game. It's typically why they decide to do anything at all. Democracy, as it gets its power from its credibility, especially if people vote, if they participate in the policy decisions, if they participate in it in putting magistrates, ministers, presidents, deputies, whatever, whoever they decide to represent them, do their bidding. It has more credibility if more people vote. So this is a problem in a place like Australia. I think in the past people just didn't show up to vote. And so when a prime minister was elected, the party whose main person ended up being the prime minister, you ended up seeing he had no mandate. If 5 people vote for this guy in a country of several million people, then he's not really the prime minister. I mean, technically speaking, his title is prime minister, but nobody has any faith in this guy. And so, it has more credibility when people participate in it, although it is a bit slow because you have to sort of weigh up all the votes. You have to count them. You kind of have to count, like, all right, what are the possibilities? There's a lot of negotiation involved with this. So this slows down the process. As we've seen from monarchy to aristocracy to democracy, good things end up getting slowed down a lot. And good voices get drowned out as well. But there's also the potential for bad. So in a case where a monarch can actually turn into a tyrant the moment that he stops caring for the people. This means he no longer has the credibility with the people. He doesn't have their consent. The people at that point, they don't like what he's doing, but they can't do anything about it. They don't consent to him. They can't stop him because he's got all the guns, right? So he end up just being prisoners of this guy. And you see the people like this in the past, like there was a guy, Dionysus of, where was he? He was in Syracuse, I believe. So this is in Sicily. He was a tyrant. He started off nobly, and then he just stopped caring, and he just went crazy, started killing people who got in his way. The same is true of the guy named Perriander in Corinth. There was a story that Herodotus tells, so anything that Herodotus says is fascinating, is entertaining. I would take it with a grain of salt. And basically, he said he'd sent somebody out over into the area that is now Turkey. I think it was in Lydia or Media, I forget part of the area, but somewhere in Turkey. But there weren't any Turks there at the time. And he asked for advice what to do with people who get in the way, people who are annoying. And the guy basically just started, he took a knife, he called the messenger over and says, I don't know, I see all this wheat here, how it's all level except for a couple pieces here, cuts them off. cuts off the parts that are sticking out until they're nice and even. And the messenger goes back and reports this and says, I don't know, he just started cutting wheat. He's like, well, which wheat did he cut? The ones that are sticking out above everyone else. And then the tyrant was like, got it, right? Just anybody sticks out and starts making a fuss, you just cut. The dumb messenger didn't get the point. So they, monarchies can turn bad, and basically the people are just prisoners. Now, aristocracy can turn into oligarchy the moment that the aristocrats stop caring about the people that they're meant to be helping. And this, and you basically, and it also happens when these aristocrats aren't really chosen because they're the best. They just be chosen because they're powerful or have money. Usually, money and power are connected. And so these people, they're not well intentioned, they're not well educated, they don't want to cooperate with one another or with the people. So they're just out there to enrich themselves. And democracy obviously can devolve into mob rule if the people are uninformed, if they're persuaded to vote for idiots or stupid policies. I won't make any allusions to today, but you can draw some inferences in every direction you want to. Typically, people will want to use the government not as a way to get things done, but a way to abuse one another. Woe betide those who are on the wrong side of the election, right? So anyway, as far as rating these are concerned, that they ended up, I think Plato and Aristotle decided that they were going to rate these things as from bad to really bad. So all of them can be really bad. Obviously, they can be good, but so often we see that good things are used for bad purposes. So, and he actually said, well, that the monarchy has the extremes. You can get a lot done with a monarch. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to go through policy meetings and all that. You just snap your fingers and it's done. However, you can do that for good things and bad things. And there's no debate, no negotiation. It just happens. And with an aristocracy and an oligarchy, good things can happen kind of quickly. It can also happen kind of badly. Really bad things can happen really quickly. There are some things slowing them down. They do have competing interests with one another, like the oligarchs or the aristocrats. But they tend to come to better conclusions, or they tend not to come to bad conclusions as often as a tyrant would. So this, there's that. And then you have democracy, where you can't get a lot done. It's okay when it gets done. It has credibility. It can turn to mob rule fairly quickly. And mob rule is pretty bad too. But what they said is what we really hate is the volatility, how one can swing. A monarch can become a tyrant so quickly. I mean, Plato ended up visiting Dionysus and said, "What the hell are you doing here? You don't know what, you came into this thing with really good intentions and then suddenly you're just killing people because they're getting in the way. That's not on. And likewise, Plato saw what happened with the democracy in Athens. It just turns into mob rule. Or if you get conquered by your neighbors, the Spartans, you end up just being on the wrong end of the stick and things are bad there. So what they decide is volatility between the monarchy and the tyranny is so bad that we just don't want it. Likewise, the volatility between aristocracy, things can go from good to bad fairly quickly, not quite as quickly as it can with a king. And from democracy to mob rule can happen pretty quickly, but it's not that great in democracy. And mob rule can be kind of quieted down. As quickly as people can be whipped up into a frenzy, they can be scared into submission, even if not by a monarch. So they said, well, because we don't like the volatility, we like good things and we like better things more, but we dislike bad things more than we like good things. So this volatility of the swing is so bad that we just have to avoid monarchy, even if it can lead to some really good things. And likewise, we should avoid aristocracy because it can become really bad in an oligarchy. So we should avoid that too. And we're just going to have to learn to deal with the difference between democracy and mob rule. And that essentially is the whole thing, is that, yeah, both of these are the worst, or, like both of these just don't lead to positive things. But it's not that big of a swing. It kind of fades. See, the thing is that the mob rule tends to follow what they call in economics animal spirits, where if you ever read the Iliad, you'll notice things like I guess it's Homer. If I don't know if Homer is actually writing this or just repeating it, you will see things like spirits start commanding forces within the army. So fear is actually impersoned or embodied. Excuse me, I shouldn't be drinking soda while I'm talking. Spirit is the spirit of fear or of bravery is actually impersoned by a god on the battlefield. And so rout, which is basically running away in panic, right, will chase away one side of the battle. And if you know anything about like people and how they work in large groups, is that they end up being very herd-like, and they end up being very the rational component in every person doesn't necessarily grow because the number of people grows. It actually kind of shrinks, where you might see a few rational people in a mob, even if every person on their own is a rational person. So that tends to be, you would say, oh, well, maybe, you can't really explain why people turn from, normal rational people into just complete animals once they get around one another. It's kind of weird, isn't it? So anyway, that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. I didn't finish my soda, but not about to chug it on screen. You're going to have to pay more for that, and you don't pay for anything. So I'll talk to you soon. Ta.